Welcome to this edition of Futurartist Records Presents. Colorado has a really impressive art scene, as you may have noticed from some of the guests we've had on previous shows. Today I get to sit down with someone who deals with the larger venues in Colorado, especially in the Denver metro area. Please welcome one of the production managers for the Denver Performing Arts Complex, Mark Gabriel DeBell. Thanks for coming up.
You betcha.
We talked a little bit before about how all of this breaks down, and there's a lot of different acronyms and different layers to this. Why don't you tell us first what your job entails, and then how does the Denver Performing Arts Complex break down into its different entities?
Okay. Well, first, what I do for a living basically right now is as a production manager, my role is to advance the shows. So when a client's coming in, whether they're bringing a show or they're creating the show here, my job is to gather as much information as I can for everybody in the facility, whether it's engineers, custodial, front of house, security, certainly on the production end of it. Mm-hmm. And then get all that information together and distribute it out so that when the client arrives in the building, the venue has what they need and we're ready to do what they need to do. And then the more honed down parts of that are in the production part, making sure that the scheduling of the crew works and that we have the gear, or if they're bringing the gear, how that's all compatible. Mm-hmm. And just making sure that all of the actual production stuff comes online.
So there's a lot involved with that.
There are a lot of details, yeah.
And there's a lot of different groups involved with this too. You've got the DPAC, you've got the DPCA, you've got all these different acronyms. Who is kind of the larger umbrella, and who are the smaller groups underneath?
Right.
And how do those work? And they're not small groups. Even the smaller groups are really not small groups.
Right. On whole, the Denver Performing Arts Complex is the giant umbrella for all of these other entities. So, the mayor has an appointee for Arts and Venues Denver, Kent Rice, and he oversees the complex as well as other city venues that are production-oriented, like Red Rocks, Coliseum, and then that breaks down to the city books the big venues, Buell Theater, Ellie Calkins Opera House, and Betcher Concert Hall, and they work with resident companies there, one being the Symphony, for how Betcher works and where the city can book other things in and around them. They work with the Denver Center Attractions, which books the majorly road shows, the big Broadway shows, also puts the smaller things in the Garner Galleria Theater.
Okay.
And then there's the Denver Center Theater Company, which is the resident regional theater company that's in the complex, the part of the complex that has the Stage Theater, the Space Theater, the Ricketson, and the Jones, as well as the Sewell Ballroom.
Okay.
So there's infinite spaces in there and a lot of different entities that work with us. In the Ellie Calkins, the resident companies are the Colorado Ballet and Opera Colorado, and so their schedules kind of dictate the flow of those buildings during their time frame.
So there's a lot of stuff going on all the time down there.
And we also use the outside portions for big events too, in the sculpture park and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Does that fall under a different category since it's not tied in directly with the theater, or does one theater kind of oversee that as an extension?
The city actually handles that more.
Okay.
And they have a event manager in place that handles the stuff out in the gallerias and in the sculpture park, and we concentrate more on the theaters themselves.
Gotcha. And it's interesting, looking at the complex and these different theaters, there's a lot of really interesting facts about that complex. I wrote a couple of them down. You have one of 3 true opera houses in the U.S. and one of 9 in the world that's really considered a true opera house.
True opera house.
Betcher is one of the first symphony halls to be built in the round, where anyone in the audience is only 65, 70 feet away from...
You're close.
Largest performing arts complex under one roof.
Yep.
Temple Buell is a test theater for Disney pre-Broadway shows.
Yep. And
it's pretty impressive.
It is. And with a lot of those kind of out-of-towners, as they used to be called. I think
Yeah.
Connecticut used to get the out-of-towners. They also used the Ellie for that. So the out-of-towner for Little Mermaid, as an example, was in the Ellie Calkins. They also like to launch tours here, which what they'll do is they'll bring in the parts and get it kind of together, work out the kinks, get their technical stuff all lined out, and then that launches the tour.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you find that the audiences in Denver are kind of the reason for that? We've got real receptive audiences. People like to go to shows, or is that the motivation for that?
I think that's part of it. I think that depends on the producing entity.
Okay.
Excuse me. I think some of it is economics.
Sure.
I think that if you were to go to some of the other major cities, you would find that it's probably more expensive to do something like this than it is in Denver.
Do you think any of it has to do with the types of spaces we have, and they're
Definitely.
kind of...
Definitely. And here's a good example. And I thought this was brilliant because the theaters in New York are very small, comparatively speaking to our wing space and everything. So when they did Little Mermaid, once you were off stage, out of sight lines, the floor was either black or it was gray, and it was in this funky jigsaw weird shape. So as they would manipulate the traffic patterns of all the bodies and the big pieces of scenery spinning and getting ready to go on and all that stuff, they could go, oh, I'm in gray, I'm standing in a wall in New York, I can't do it like this.
Gotcha.
So they actually worked out a lot of the physical stuff in the traffic flow in the wings, which ultimately, once you translate to that other theater, that just makes that a better transition.
Yeah, for sure.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, the great test area, and they've got the flexibility to do it, which is cool. How does Denver compare to New York, Chicago? You had mentioned that a lot of theaters in New York are small. Is that generally the case, or is Denver kind of the exception to that?
I think that there are big theaters around the country, especially a lot of cities that accept the tours, that bring the tours through. More and more and more, you see more bigger facilities that can handle that kind of a show.
So is that kind of a newer development? Or do you think that just kind of luck of the draw?
I think that's just how it worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Denver's got a lot of history when it comes to theater. We spoke earlier about Central City and how that has impacted things and stuff. So do you find that we're on the cutting edge of those things because of that, or?
It's kind of funny. I think that a lot of times, and this part has changed over the years. I know I was mentioning to you that in one capacity or another, I've worked down there since 1984.
Yeah.
So in the 80s, a lot of times you would get the feeling that someone felt like they were coming to Podunk to do theater, right? But that's really not the case. The level of professionalism and the level of the quality of the production was very, very high. I mean, Denver Center Theater Company, 300 of us stood in a line as our Tony came into the building, and we passed it into the building.
Yeah.
I mean, it was high quality stuff.
Because of where Denver is in the United States, and it's kind of seen as out in the middle of nowhere, Wild West type stuff, we really have had to push the envelope to show people, hey, look, we can pull this off.
Right.
And we've pulled a lot of things off in a really big way. I mean, some of those things that we mentioned with, the opera houses and things like that, it's a big deal.
If you want a barometer of how Denver feels about the arts, and not just performing arts, but the arts, how long has the SCFD been in play, right? How many communities perpetually, year after year after year, vote to fund the arts?
Right.
Denver's art scene is awesome.
Yeah. And it's got so much stuff going on, too. Which brings me to, how do the arts in Colorado affect the Colorado economy and vice versa?
Right. I know in my previous position I had the opportunity to serve on some really awesome committees and study groups and things. And Colorado, and I want to say this was probably 2011 or 12-ish, but they did a career cluster study. And in the state of Colorado, the creative arts is the 4th highest cluster of employment. And that includes any artistic job you could think of, whether it was, artist or graphic artist or perform, whatever. And that's a really high cluster.
Yeah.
Part of the anomaly in Colorado is that a lot of times, especially in the performing arts, people come here or study here and they learn here with the desire to move somewhere else.
Right.
So we did a lot of studying on what we called the pipeline back into the industry, and how do you create a pipeline that sparks and draws people to be here and to remain here and practice their craft. And in the time that I served on that versus now, I feel that part is changing a lot. I feel that people appreciate Denver more as more of an urban situation, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that local talent is leaning more apt towards staying. And as the opportunities increase, that just kind of feeds that.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you about what you see on the professional level versus local level and how they feed into each other. You're right, we've got a lot of people that come here to study. We've got the theater and the classical training at CU. We've got the jazz scene at UNC, and they're both world class. But then do people stay?
Right.
But there's a lot of incredible local talent in Colorado as well. Do the types of venues we have, you think, impact people wanting to stay? And do these venues pull from local talent pools, or are we pulling from national talent pools?
Right. I think it's a mix, and I think that when I'm a Denver native, so I've been there my whole life.
Yeah.
I think that when you move away from the big complexes into the smaller venues and everything, Denver has an incredible thriving scene. The music scene in Denver is awesome. The art scene is awesome. There's galleries. There's more and more and more. I see that level blossoming, and I think that's awesome. And the other thing that I see is within the idea of the bigger complexes is tapping into that to draw in and to give more spaces available, more opportunities. I worked on a wonderful project with a group of young performers, the Sonder Group, and they created this interactive piece that the audience was part of, and you participated in, and you got the main part of the story, and then you broke into 4 groups, so you all saw the show, but you didn't see it in the same order.
Oh, interesting.
And it was very creative, and she was a 19-year-old that came up with this idea and put this troupe together, and they did this piece in the studio loft at the Ellie Calkins, and they transformed the room, and it was a great opportunity.
Gives people outside of the complex a chance to work in the complex, which obviously would make people want to stay.
Right.
Do you find that the bigger venues are more open now than they used to be to things?
I do.
And is that economic, or is that just trying to kind of sustain a Colorado scene, or is it a mix of things?
That's a tough question, because I think a lot of that comes from leadership, how a level way up there views the importance of arts in it. And I think that over the years, since the early 80s, I've seen a shift in a more inclusive thought process, a more, art begets art kind of a thing.
Yeah. There's so much talent in Colorado, and there's so much talent that people don't know about in Colorado. And so to hear that it's becoming more inclusive and that the upper echelon is being more accepting to the lower echelon, I think that's going to be so beneficial in the long run for the local talent. But it's also going to impact the upper echelon, because now they've got a bigger pool to pull from.
Right. It's also economically layered, because if you've got 3 small theaters in some district and a couple art galleries, and they're drawn in the body, and there's 3 or 4 restaurants in that area. That's going to increase the economic factor for the restaurants. It's going to, I mean, it just kind of grows and grows.
And isn't it interesting how arts are part of our everyday life all the time, whether we're aware of it or not?
Right.
And so helping people tap into that,
right,
you know,
yeah,
is really cool.
We kind of discussed how do people find that spark, and how do you tap into that to give them that growth?
Yeah,
kind of a thing.
Yeah. What other venues, you had mentioned Red Rocks and stuff, what other venues are part of, I don't even know what acronym it would fall under, but you know, you've got the physical complex.
Venues?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you've got the complex, but then you've got all these other things. How many are tied into that? You had mentioned Red Rocks. And
Red Rocks, the Coliseum, the McNichols building that's down at Civic Center Park. And then beyond that, I know they're really heavy into like a lot of the arts projects, the public artwork stuff.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of public art down at the complex and in those facilities, and that's always kind of changing and evolving, and different showings and stuff like that.
So it's more of a city level than a state level type.
Yeah, these are all city facilities.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
You think about that when you go to see a show and you just think Colorado, you don't think the city of Denver always.
Right.
So interesting.
Right.
That's a lot of theaters for a city.
It is.
Especially if anyone who's been in that complex, every door you open's a different theater.
Right.
It's pretty impressive.
Right.
Pretty impressive.
And you know, in terms of staffing, you think about it, once the Red Rock season hits, that's an insane schedule up there.
Yeah.
You know,
It really
and it's
is.
not like they come and sit for a week or two. It's like churns it over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So it generates a lot of work.
For anybody who might remember the old McNichols building that did all the concerts, how did that shift when that changed, when that went away? You know, because that was an indoor arena that was always
for
available.
The concerts.
Yeah.
I think that probably some of the other venues that came up, and I don't know what order they were built in, but you know, like the Budweiser Center or the Bank One Center out on 36, whatever that is.
Right.
And the Pepsi Center picked up a lot of that.
Yeah.
You know, and in a more infrastructure-friendly building.
Right. Yeah. Way newer buildings for sure.
Yeah.
So was the old McNichols building part of the performing arts?
Yeah.
So then does the Pepsi Center and those things, are they now outside of that? Did that take some of the pressure off of the performing arts?
I would assume it did. Yeah, that's actually back when it would have been still called theaters and arenas.
Oh, interesting. So all that changes too.
Yeah, and the city was more, if I understand how it worked correctly, the city staffed more of positions in terms of, you know, management and who controls what. And then as that evolved, they started subcontracting more to other entities, kind of a thing.
Sure.
So, you know, down at the Denver Center, there's all kinds of subcontracted entities in there.
How many of these theaters or these entities within the complex, how many of them are tapped into local talent pools consistently? You've got a lot of the traveling troops that come through, like at the Buell, things like that.
I think it depends. So, like on the production end of it, for the big shows, let's say one of the Broadway shows, 9 out of 10 times they'll have local musicians involved. There's always local labor on the stagehand side that works alongside with their folks. Sometimes, depending on the show, they'll use local talent for a role or two, especially when children are involved, kind of a thing.
Okay, cool.
And I don't know if that's producing-wise, if it's cheaper to travel and tutor a child than to find local to, you know, I don't know how all that works.
Right.
Wardrobe is generally the same kind of a thing with local crew. Denver Center Theater Company itself, most of those folks are local now, and they also, besides, you know, the standard running of show, they also have a full costume shop, they have a full scenery shop, props, paint, so they employ artisans for the actual building of their productions.
Gotcha. Do all of these feed into each other too? Like you say wardrobe from one, can they be tapped into by another if they run into a situation, or how does that work?
It depends on the situation. I think if you have a good working relationship with people, in a pinch, then everybody finds a way to make it work,
right.
kind of a thing.
You just hope you never get in a pinch, of course.
Right.
But especially, if a Broadway show comes through, you were talking about how some of the techs are local. How does that work when a group comes in? Is it a 2-to-1, 3-to-1? Is it a 10%? Does it depend on the show?
It depends on the show. If it's
Okay.
a yellow card show, which are contracted directly with the International for IATSE, then they have specific numbers that they have to use for each phase of what's contained from the beginning of the load in to the end of the load out. So you will get a list. On this day, I need this many carpenters, I need this many electricians, I need this, I need that, I need this.
Oh, okay.
And then you take all that and translate that into a call that goes to the local hall, and then they dispatch those people and give you the names back, and that's who you get that day to play with.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And that's true except for the house crews. There are permanent employees of SMG, 4 stagehands in each house.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you just used another acronym that is really long.
I did. Do you want the whole title?
I'm going to make you do that because you
All
brought
right.
it up.
Now I might screw it up now. The International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees and Motion Picture Operators of the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. I believe that is the official
And
title.
we'll see if anyone
and then
remembers.
And then it's AFL-CIO
Gotcha. Right.
on the end.
Right. So what do they oversee, and what is their purpose when it comes to the arts?
They deal with production, so props, lights, scenery, sound. The International allows different locals to negotiate their own contracts for the most part. There are international contracts as well. So you, in a market, they can kind of set the parameters with a negotiation for a collective bargaining agreement between the company and the union.
Gotcha.
For us, that entails staffing 4 people in each venue
Right.
when we do things. So
There's so many different types of unions, and
Yeah.
and they do different things. When it comes to the arts complex, are all of your theaters part of that union?
I do not believe the Sewell Ballroom or the Garner Galleria Theater is. IATSE has always, for a very long time, has been over at the Denver Center Theater Company, and I believe that I don't know if their shop's unionized yet or not. I can't recall. I think there was talk about that. But the big buildings are,
Okay.
and I know Wardrobe, I believe, unionized a few years back at the Denver Center as well.
Gotcha. Unions have a lot of purposes, but when it comes to the arts and when you're trying to bring in big shows and things, and especially East Coast is real strong union. Does it allow you to get bigger shows in and work with bigger companies, or does it really make any difference?
I would actually defer a true answer to that to those that book the shows and produce them.
Sure.
But in my thought process, I would say that there is a certain expectation when there is a union involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear all the stories and all the bad stuff, but
Sure.
the reality is that there's a certain expectation, and that expectation is to have a higher quality. And so I think that does lend itself. I do know that there are some shows that if it is not a union house will not play it.
Interesting.
So, I can think that it doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Does it go the other way where some groups will go, yeah, we're not going to.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And to be honest with you, a lot of times it's the smaller mom and pop kind of things where that's a harder thing to grasp and to deal
Sure.
with. So that's part of the game I play as a production manager, is how you balance the real needs, be fair to the labor, and keep the cost at a fair level.
Right.
And that you do that with scheduling. You do that with, you know, trying to predict where you're going to hit the pitfall and where that's going to change things. So
And that brings me back to the local talent, because I think that's something that local talent has always, and probably always will, deal with, is the, you know, the pay to play, or
Right.
the what's our expense versus what we're going to get paid.
Right.
Man, we've got a big enough audience for this play or this concert, but we can't afford your venue.
right.
And what do you see kind of as a bridge for that gap that exists? Is that something that the Performing Arts Center or the complex has looked into because they have so many venues? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me personally, any space is a potential performance space.
sure,
You know, and I directed a piece in college that I wanted to do that no one would give me a space, so I did it in a makeup room.
right,
And it turned out to be perfect, you know, that kind of a thing. So I think that with the smaller groups, finding the spaces, I have a lot of friends that are very big and have maintained a living in the community theater world and in the, you know, in that next level spot. And they are very creative in their spaces and
Yeah.
what they do. So I think this goes back to that art begets art, and the more that occurs and the more people want to see and go, the more spaces are created, the more affordable things. I mean, if you look at the next stage 2020 projected ideas that came out for where they want to go with the performing arts complex in the future, you know, there's talk about a new symphony hall. There's talk about within that symphony hall a downtown hub of maybe a school of the arts.
Oh, cool.
You know, and
Yeah.
an integration at the education level as well.
right, right,
You know, Denver Center Theater Company does their shops and their offices are in the old tramway building, the Newman Center they call it now,
okay,
on Arapahoe and Spear, and they do an academy every year where all these kids come in and do these learning in production kind of stuff.
yeah,
So, you know, I think there's always that effort,
yeah.
you know.
Has that tied into the school system at all? Those academies and things where you,
I think so. I mean, that's also an interesting entity. I served for quite a while on a creative careers group that would get together, and it was made up of professionals in the arts, educators, vendors, and there was always that discussion, the idea that arts are incredibly important in life every day and they need to stay in education. And
Right.
when those education programs fall asunder, how do you correct that? How do you
Right.
move that in the right direction, you know?
right.
So it's
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with that. I think that because the arts in the school systems always seem to be taking a little bit of a hit, sometimes a big hit, sometimes not so big a hit, but
Right.
always taking a little bit of a hit, having investments like that from the people who are making it happen,
Right.
you know, can be a great gap. Which leads me to this next question, and you already answered part of it. Is, in your opinion, what can not just the art scene that's actually doing it already, like the complex, but what can we do as individuals? What do you think we can do in Colorado to grow our art scene, make people more aware of the local stuff that's here, support the stuff that's already in place, and make sure that it stays around?
right. You know, that's interesting thought, because a lot of that has to do with the timing of when you have those opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So next week, as an example, and this kind of ties back to what efforts are being made, the city has been working in conjunction, and we're doing a career day, which will be tours and some presentations from facilities, front of house, booking, marketing, production. And we're going to have a couple different groups come through and give little presentations and do question and answer kind of stuff, because when you go sit and you watch a show, if you're doing your job, no one even knows you're there.
Yes.
Right? And,
right.
I don't care what, unless you're the person out there on stage doing your thing,
right.
no one should even know you're at work.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it works. So a lot of how things work and the cogs and what really has to go into a production gets lost.
Yeah.
You don't, the average person doesn't see that. So for me, when I'm talking to people, I'll point things out. I'll just even if it's casual conversation. Wow, look at that shadow. Look at that, look at that. Because as a society, I think we need to spend more time just appreciating the beauty in life.
And it's important that people appreciate what's going on behind the scenes, and the fact that there's a production manager that's putting in all these hours to coordinate so they can just sit down and watch the show.
Right.
And getting people involved in the industry that can understand that as they're learning their craft, I think has a big impact too. I'm sure you see groups come in when you're dipping into a local talent pool. The people who've done their homework and understand the process, and the people who are interested but don't really know what they're up against.
Right.
Has a big impact on how shows work.
It does. And the other thing about that is that if there's someone who doesn't have the base knowledge, or doesn't necessarily, they're in a bigger pond at that point in time or something, the ones that are going to survive are the ones that kind of go, okay, this is how it is, and let's just see what happens, and you just plow through it, right? And that's really, in the entertainment industry, you learn to plow through stuff. You
every day, don't you? Yeah.
You have to.
You have to be on your toes all the time, no matter what position you're in.
We had a discussion about, responsibility and stuff a little bit, and, in the production management role, I don't care what goes wrong. They're not going to seek that person out. Your client is going to be toe-to-toe with you saying, what's going on? Yeah. And you got to practice that sentence, it's my bad, let me fix it.
Right.
And just take care of it.
Yeah.
And that's where you really kind of earn your keep. The advanced stuff is awesome, but, nobody's perfect. And it is really easy to make mistakes. I make the joke that the month of mayhem because of graduations. But when you're prepping 9 or 10 events that all occur within about 12 days, it's really hard to keep all of your details in particular for which one is what.
Yeah.
So you make mistakes.
Yeah.
Then you fix them.
Right. And then you go on to the next one. Yeah. Where can people get information on each of these theaters and what's going on, get schedules, get all that stuff?
There's a couple websites. DPCA has one, and they'll list everything they produce. Colorado Convention Center has a website that'll do upcoming events, and Denver Center for the Performing Arts. I'm trying to think how the website reads.
Gotcha.
They also have one, and a lot of those schedules, they kind of intermix. And then if you're looking for a particular show, it'll send you to that show, to that website for more detail.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah. Mark, thanks for coming up today and taking some time out of your schedule, because I know you're always on the run working on shows. I would love to have you back.
Sure.
Go into some more detail on some of this production stuff, what you've seen, how you've seen it grow in Colorado. I've seen it grow, and I'm not involved with it directly like you are, so I'm sure you've seen some amazing things happen.
Yeah.
But thanks again for coming up. Really appreciate it.
You betcha.
Yeah. Folks, stick around. We're going to have some information put up here so you can go see these shows in these amazing theaters. And make sure you like, you share, and you subscribe to this program. We want to continue to support arts in Colorado. I'm Michael Hartsock. Thanks for watching Futurartist Records Presents.